Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hello, I'm so glad everyone is here. My name is Stephanie DiPetrillo, and I am delighted to welcome you to our TOD in your downtown forum. And today our event is Filling the Gaps, Infill for Transit-Connected Communities. For those of you who don't know me, I lead the NJTOD project here at the Rutgers School of Planning, the Rutgers Bloustein School of Planning and Public Policy, as part of my work with the Alan M. Voorhees Transportation Center. Let's see if I can actually remember to advance slides today. So, NJTOD is a statewide and national resource, mostly online, but obviously not only, that highlights transit-friendly planning and the potential for development and redevelopment around New Jersey's transit facilities. We do this by sharing local and national best practices and problem-solving experiences. And I hope that you will also share your problem sharing experiences later when we open it up for a conversation. This project is made possible by a long-standing partnership between Rutgers VTC and the Transit Friendly Planning Program at New Jersey Transit. I am proud to say that 2025 marks the 20th year of this collaboration. Today's forum continues our the TOD in Your Downtown series, which we are pleased to host with support from downtown New Jersey. At this event, with this event, we will have hosted 9 TOD in Your Downtown forums, as well as our 2024 New Jersey TOD Symposium. All of the past events have been recorded and are available on our website for those who want to revisit them or to catch up. I want to thank today's panelists who bring experience across policy, economic development, transit, real estate, and environmental planning, as well as our moderator, Chuck Latini, outgoing president of APA New Jersey and principal of LNG Planning. I also want to thank my colleagues at the Transit Friendly Planning Program, as well as my colleague at Downtown New Jersey for making today possible. And before I close, I want to also mention our upcoming VTC Distinguished Lecture. On Wednesday, October 29th, Dr. Eric Guerrera of the University of Pennsylvania will discuss his new book, Overbuilt: The High Cost and Low Rewards of U.S. Highway Construction and How America's Infrastructure Legacy Continues to Shape Our Transportation Future. And with that, I am pleased to turn things over to Natalie. We always do this. Pineiro.
Think about Pineiro bread.
Pineiro, Executive Director of Downtown New Jersey. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you guys so much for being here today. On behalf of Downtown New Jersey, I want to welcome you to today's program. Downtown New Jersey's mission is to support and advocate for the vitality of New Jersey's downtowns. And today's topic gets right to the heart of that work. Infill development around our transit hubs isn't just about land use. It's about creating walkable, vibrant, and equitable communities that strengthen both our local economies and quality of life. I want to thank our partners, right? The Bloustein School, TOD, NJ Transit, all of the above. Thank all of you for being here. Before we begin, I do want to, shameless plug, invite you to join us at our annual Downtown New Jersey conference on October 23rd at Stengel Factory in Flemington. This year's theme, Street Level Magic, Building Experiential Downtowns, features the incredible David Dixon as our keynote speaker, along with panels, and we're doing something a little different this year. We're doing walking tours through downtown Flemington, focused on redevelopment, land use, and arts and culture. Also, we are doing things a little different this year. We are breaking out our Excellence Awards. So Excellence Awards will not be at the conference this year, but they will be at a standalone ceremony in December. That being said, if you have any incredible projects that you want to nominate, nominations have been extended to October 31st. So thank you again for being with us. And with that, I want to call up our illustrious moderator, Chuck Latini.
Got iced tea juice on here. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. So, as introduced, I'm Chuck Latini. For those who don't know me, I've been in planning and particularly transit-oriented development work for nearly 25 years, or actually more than 25 years now. Over that time, I've seen TOD evolve from a relatively new policy initiative to a well-documented, proven strategy for strengthening neighborhoods, spurring economic development, and connecting people to opportunity. We've made tremendous progress in New Jersey in this front, moving beyond simply building around transit to creating creative communities with housing, retail, public spaces, and services that support vibrant, walkable places. TOD has become a cornerstone of how we think about smart growth, sustainability, and equitable access to transportation and housing. Thank you to New Jersey Transit for continuing to hold the mantle in this regard. We've seen this evolve over these past 25, 30 years, and even today we have some of the OG transit TOD advocates who bravely stepped forward and started pushing this initiative some 30 years ago. We have Jack Kanarick, who kicked this thing off, and of course, all those great staff members who were part of that initiative, you know, from Vivian Baker to Rich Roberts and Mike Viscardi, RJ Palladino, Tom Schultz, and of course, Lou Milan, who has now passed this off to Megan Massey and her great team and all the hard work that they continue to do promoting TOD in the state. So thank you all for that effort. You've really moved the ball and shaped the state in meaningful ways. So today I'm joined by a fantastic panel of experts who will share their perspectives on where we are now and what's next. Each panelist will briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll open up for discussion after that. We'll shift into a more interactive format, and I'll pose some questions and invite public participation as well. So without further ado, I think we're going to just go right down the line, but I definitely love the fact that we're going right down the line because I wanted to start with Mr. Evans to kick us off. And so Tim, please. Are you on?
Is this on? Oh, you did. I'm Tim Evans. I'm the research director at New Jersey Future. We are a land use policy research and advocacy organization. My job there, I do most of our number crunching. I'm also sort of a housing and transportation policy specialist. I've been there since 1999, right after finishing my MCRP in this very building. And before I went back to school to study planning, I also have a master's in statistics, and I worked at the Census Bureau for 5.5 years. If there are any freight nerds in the crowd, I wrote the weighting specification for the 1993 commodity flow survey. So I've been a transportation guy for longer than I've been a planner, actually. But I still care about it and still like to participate in events like this.
Good morning. I'm Zenobia Fields. I am the Director of Economic Development for the City of Plainfield. Before that, like Tim, I spent most of my public career in transportation. I was with DOT for 4 years, and then before that, I was with the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority for 12 years. So my background includes urban planning. It also includes architecture. Right now, I focus on economic development, which is a lot of redevelopment and infill. Plainfield has the good fortune of actually having two train stations. So we're able to see the development that's happening around there, and that's some of the things that I'll be talking about today.
My name is Mike Heyer. I'm the manager of transit-oriented development with New Jersey Transit. We work closely with the Transit Fund Planning Group, so we do a lot of the facilitation, like we talked about earlier, so I appreciate the shout out for all of the DoD efforts. In continuing those works and those efforts for implementing TOD, really infill development throughout the state as a state agency to handle our obligation of that portion of the state component. Prior to New Jersey Transit, I worked on the affordable housing side in New York, and then transitioned into this role. Prior to that, I was the brief stint in architecture and planning, and now really more on the real estate side of things.
Good morning. My name is Michael Hong, and I am the Vice President of Development at European Development Group. And we've been in operation since about 1986, and we have about 5,000 units across the state. Our bread and butter is affordable housing. And I've been with the company for just over 10 years now. I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in my Master's of City Planning with a focus on public-private development. And before that, I was in a whole different fields in IT consulting and did a stint at NASA. And so I did a complete 180. But I very much enjoy being fully immersed in affordable housing and focusing on especially downtown, both suburban and urban development.
Hey, my name is Lisa Leone. I work at the Nature Conservancy at the New Jersey chapter. So I have a big focus on our Greening Our Cities team, which is urban conservation, thinking of like stormwater management, utilizing trees and nature to better manage any kind of like issues that cities are handling right now. So there's a little bit of like a tie-in, but like off to the side maybe, where thinking about when we do our development in our cities, like how can we make it walkable but also safe for people and take away that urban heat flooding component. But before that, I worked pretty closely with Bloustein School. I was at a Transportation Management Association focusing on northwestern New Jersey, doing complete and green streets, pedestrian and bike safety. Before that, I did environmental planning, and I just have a background in environmental studies and anthropology.
Great, thank you all. So Tim, why don't you come and tell us what you've been up to these past, how many years now?
26, I guess. It doesn't feel that long.
No.
Okay, so I guess, good. Title slide. Since we don't really have a good hard and fast definition of infill, even though it's in the name of the program today, I don't know how to quantify it. But I do have a sense of how to quantify redevelopment, so I'm going to give you some facts about redevelopment in general. Because I think a lot of what happens as redevelopment is actually infill. So redevelopment really, since about 2008 or so, has become the default development pattern in New Jersey. If you look at 1990 through 2007, the percent of population growth that was accounted for by towns that were mostly built out was like under 20%, and now it's more than half from 2008 or 2007 onward. And it's even, oh yeah, okay. So built out places now account for a majority of New Jersey's population growth. So how is that happening? Obviously, built out doesn't mean full. There's still room to accommodate new growth in places that don't have much land left. It's even more obvious if you look at residential certificates of occupancy. This is the percent of residential COs that have been issued in towns that are at least 90% built out, going back to 1996. So you can see it's over 2/3 now since 2020. And the reason for the year cutoff is those are the years when we get new land use, land cover data. So that's when I update my calculation as to who's 90% built out. You know, because each period, more and more towns hit that threshold. So, but despite the fact that we're getting more and more towns hitting 90% build out, it hasn't stopped CO activity in those towns. So yeah, really, the point is, you can put new housing just about anywhere if there's the will to do it. So one of the benefits of redevelopment is it significantly reduces the pressure to develop new land. So in the 90s and in the early part of the 2000s, when I first started at New Jersey Future, the big problem was suburban sprawl, the rapid consumption of land. The rate of land development was typically double the rate of population growth. And then something happened. Then between 2007 and 2015, they pulled even, where no longer was the rate of land development outstripping population growth. And even more remarkable, since 2015, the rate of population growth now is double the rate of land development. So this is all thanks to all that redevelopment happening. We're not having to build out on the ex-urban fringe anymore and consume more of our remaining land. And speaking of our remaining land, another benefit of that is that the state is still approaching full build out. That little orange bar at the top is what remains available, meaning it's undeveloped but could still be developed. It's not environmentally constrained or permanently preserved. But you'll notice we're reaching that build-out point now, much more so because of the pace of land preservation than because of development. It's the rate of preservation has been much higher than the rate of new development since 2007 or so. Another thing you can accomplish with redevelopment, and particularly with infill development, tends to be on smaller parcels. You can help fill in your missing middle housing options. What this is showing you is over time, what % of the state's housing units fall into each of these categories. And look in particular at the third cluster over, the units in structures with 2 to 4 units. It used to be 30% of the state's housing was in buildings like that in 1950. It's fallen to half of that in 2023. And in fact, the actual number of such units has declined since 1950, not just the percent. So the missing middle really is missing. But since these are small housing types, you can put them on small parcels like an underused suburban surface parking lot, for example. You could put duplexes in 3 and 4 unit buildings on there, in addition to the townhouses, in addition to the larger apartment buildings that are favored, because you'll see that rightmost column or group of columns. It's the single family detached and the larger apartment buildings are the two types that a lot of towns, their housing is basically bifurcated between those two groups, and they have very little in the way of townhouses or duplexes in 3 and 4 unit buildings. But you can start squeezing those in on some of these infill parcels. The multifamily bears a little bit more of a mention. Part of the reason that has taken off in recent years is in 2015, when the Council on Affordable Housing was effectively abolished, and the process of compliance, municipalities complying with their affordable housing requirements got kicked back to the courts. That kind of broke the logjam, and stuff started happening now that the courts were involved again. Oh yeah, no, this is real. We had this bureaucracy that gummed things up, but now it's gone, but the obligation didn't go away. The Supreme Court decision didn't go away. So they started producing more affordable units, and the default preference for doing that was through inclusionary multifamily projects. So you end up with this now growth in multifamily units, and it's not just the affordable units, because these inclusionary developments, if it's 20% affordable, it's 80% market rate. So you're getting a lot of market rate multifamily that the market needed. So that's the good news there. And more good news is that those are also easy to squeeze a lot of units onto a small parcel in a redevelopment area. Because I was frustrated with how I originally thought I was going to measure infill, and it didn't pan out, but I wanted to add some new analysis that I hadn't done already. So I looked at something else that you can accomplish with redevelopment projects, particularly if it's like a suburban retrofit where you've got a big surface parking lot, is adding connectivity to your street network. We're now getting to the point where some of these first generation post-World War II suburbs are hitting 90% build out but they're built out in a very car-dependent way. So what I'm showing you here is of the 328 municipalities that were at least 90% built out as of 2020, it's a histogram of what their median block size looks like. So how long does it take you to go around the block? You'll see most of them are in pretty good, like below 4 to 5 acres or less, because most of the places that were 90% built out were older downtowns and cities with small, fine-grained grid street networks. But look to the right of the graph. You're seeing now a bunch of towns with not particularly well-connected street networks hitting build-out. So these are places like Florham Park, Franklin Lakes, Hanover Township, Livingston, Mahwah, first-generation post-war suburbs where the street network was really built to accommodate cars. But if you have a large parcel becoming available for redevelopment, especially like a office park or a big shopping center that's mostly surface parking where you don't really have to knock down any old buildings to put up new ones, it's also an opportunity to take those parcels and connect them with the surrounding development, because a lot of them were initially built specifically not to connect with their surroundings. They were meant to be little isolated islands so that, the traffic going to these places doesn't have to go through neighborhoods. Well, why wouldn't you want your neighborhood to be connected to the grocery store? I don't know, that was how people thought in the 50s. But if you add this connectivity now, you create opportunities for people to, not only people that live in the new development to walk internally, but to connect to the surrounding area. People in the surrounding areas can now walk or bike to the new development. And I think that's all I have, so I guess, Zenobia, you're up next.
So a lot of the things that Tim was saying about the redevelopment and an infill, I think that Plainfield, we've had to practice looking in what you're seeing on the map. This is a location of one of our train stops. This is the Netherwood train station. Then you're seeing development around our central business district, our downtown. That's the Plainfield train station. And then we have some development that's happening in our industrial corridors that we're looking to take advantage of innovation and also looking at sustainability efforts. So I won't bore you by reading this, but I will say that Plainfield has seen over the last 10 years or the decade about $2 billion in investment in development. A lot of that has been looking at brownfield development. We have very few greenfield spaces that are still available in Plainfield. What we're focusing on now, where we're looking at the housing, we have a lot of mixed-use developments. We have met our affordable housing obligation, but there's still a need. So we still have a goal of making sure that we do have some affordable units. Also looking about where Tim was talking about that 2 to 4 unit blend, we are looking at some of those smaller units for sale for people, where you're looking at townhomes. You're looking at single and 2-family homes for sale. And then in terms of sustainability, making sure that we have that connectivity to our train stations, our hubs that are going on, looking at implementing an EV shuttle coming up in the next year. So these are some of our developments that you are seeing. All of these developments happen to be looking at, they were in the infill area. They are surrounding either our Netherwood train station or our Plainfield train station. One of the things that we look at is what space do we have available. Tim mentioned about building on some of our parking lots. What's identified in red is one of the parking lots that the city owns. Is right across the street from the Plainfield train station. This is prime because we also have an area in need of redevelopment that's been designated here, where we can work with developers for developing on top. You're not looking for that surface lot, you're looking to build up in structured parking and then also build mixed use on top of it. This is one of our developments where it actually takes part with some adaptive reuse. This is an old YMCA building. It's a 1920s building. We received a historic preservation grant from the New Jersey Trust. where we're developing a historic preservation plan. Then we're going to be eligible to take advantage of historic tax credits to do the construction of it. When it's done, it's going to be a 55,000 square feet recreation and cultural center for the city. Behind it, you're seeing a 100% affordable according to UHAC standards. It's going to be 220 units behind it. This is right across from City Hall in our urban core. Just some of the other perspectives that are inside of it. And it also takes advantage where it's reaching out into the community. We have green spaces. We're going to have an opportunity for some gallery spaces. Now, across the street, because with 220 spaces and then also a recreation center, we have a need to have a parking deck. So with 220 spaces, we don't necessarily have all those spaces located on site across the street, but I said we mentioned City Hall. So this is City Hall, also a 1920s historic building. But we have an opportunity to build a sustainable parking garage behind it. What you're seeing here, this is the top view where you're seeing it's going to be solar panels. There's also louvers, but it still maintains the historic character while making sure that we're moving towards sustainability and green infrastructure. So what you're seeing, the green louvers, this essentially disappears because you have a biophilic wall that's happening here. You have these solar louvers that are green. And then on top of it, you have this glass office performance space that's going to be developed. So you can see the solar louvers that are coming off to the side. Inside, you can't even tell that this is actually a parking deck going up. This is a 5-level parking deck, and then on top of it, we have 2 stories of commercial and office. It also has a battery storage backup that works for the entire building that's coming from the solar panel, and that's going to power the deck itself as well as provide energy to City Hall. Now, this is some of what we're looking at when we're talk about redevelopment in terms of our zoning and our bulk standards and regulations. So when we're looking at redevelopment, we look at, well, what type of bulk standards are we changing? That may be just the area that you're allowed to take up in some of those parcels, looking at the setbacks and then some of the height requirements. And then identifying some of the permitted uses that you want in those areas. Another redevelopment plan, where this is quite a large redevelopment plan, it takes up about 2 city blocks, where we wanted to look at the opportunity. We're a block away from the train station here. We have, by the train station, we received a Transportation Alternatives Program grant where we could develop a pedestrian plaza that's going to be here. We have another development going on in one of our parking lots that we owned over here. That's going to be this building here. It's going to be 100 units. And New Brunswick has deltas, but we're happy to say we're going to have deltas in Plainfield coming soon too. All right. Then also taking advantage of the context that you're at is we decided that we have Union College over here. We have our major downtown corridor that's going in Front Street. We have a lot of restaurants going here. We wanted to make sure that we were creating redevelopment plans that complemented the context. So what you're seeing in red right here, we've identified this as a potential entertainment district and working with some of our developers for that, because we know we have developments like this coming. This is going to be a 1,300 mixed-use, mixed-income development. It is already looking at, as Tim mentioned, it's going to be 20% workforce affordable in that building, 80% market rate. The first of 6 buildings is built. They're working on the second one. When it's done, it's going to look like this. It's a city within a city. And it also makes sure that we balance some of that walkability, and that another pedestrian plaza is going to be a part of this. looking at what we do to introduce this infill is that we make sure that we have some of those redevelopment plans ready. So when we go out, we have conversations with the developers. They know what we're looking for in terms of the uses and the standards in that area. We received the Transportation Alternatives Grant for this one. We're looking to start construction hopefully this year, just waiting for that authorization from DOT. I don't see anybody here to bother, but hopefully this year. This takes advantage of a pedestrian plaza. It's going to be closed to vehicles. We're going to have outdoor dining. We're going to have a cinema on the lawn. We're also going to install quite a large mural and information digital billboard. Now, one of the things that we're really happy about with the infill development, of course, this is one of the lands where it's a known contaminated site. What you're seeing in this corner, this was a warehouse that had been vacant and abandoned for about 30 years. And New Year's Eve last year, we were able to have a day of reckoning. The wrecking ball took this down. We're happy to say that hopefully by November 1st, or definitely by the holidays, we'll be opening up one of the largest pickleball courts in the East Coast coming up. That's right across from our Netherwood station. So Pickle Rage is coming, so mark your calendars. We welcome you to New Jersey. You'll have a restaurant. All right. Some of the other developments that we're looking at, it's an opportunity. We're focusing on restaurants, recreation, like I mentioned. We have some of our medical facilities, making sure that we're connecting all of those things, but keeping the idea of sustainability in mind. And that is it. I will hand it over.
All right. So I think, first off, thanks to the first two panelists for kind of explaining and setting the table for why we're here and some of the local level. What I want to do now is just take you through some of the state opportunities, understanding that with the housing crisis that New Jersey is facing, it's not up to one single entity, one single municipality. That's why we talk about affordable housing obligations and needs that are designated as a fair share. So really emphasizing that it's up to everyone to do their own part. And New Jersey Transit, as a state agency, also acknowledges that it has a responsibility in implementing some of that affordable housing. So we'll look quickly at one of our examples of one that is actually under construction right now. So just to set the table, this is the Hoboken Connect project, obviously located in Hoboken, New Jersey, at the Hoboken Terminal. So this is a bit of an interesting one because it is kind of the nexus of multimodal transit. You have the light rail, you have the path, the traditional rail, as well as ferry and bus. So there's lots of transportation, highly walkable for everyone that's familiar with Hoboken. It presents kind of a different opportunity or a higher density look at infill development. So just to set the table here for people that are unfamiliar, Site 2 is the residential component furthest to the left. That is along Observer. Then we have the Site 1, which is further east. That is a new opportunity for a spec office. So that's over 700,000, with the residential component being 386 units to be delivered with a 20% affordable housing. In addition to that, there are 70,000 square feet of retail opportunity that are coming online. Most of that is done through the implementation and rehabilitation through the debt defeasance funds of $176 million for the restoration of the ferry terminal building on the south. So that is a two-story building. It is turn of the century Beaux-Arts kind of style building. Absolutely gorgeous inside. It has been grossly underutilized for years. So this is now a good opportunity to restore it to the way it should be and also restore a public component to it. And then in addition to that, we have the Warrington Plaza, which is the public area in front of the terminal, which for years, with that coupled with Hudson Place, have been mostly used as parking. And in a highly walkable area such as Hoboken, that is your primary entrance into the terminal, into the train yard. So really what we're looking at is the station access prioritization of really right-sizing the difference of the cars and how you access for pedestrian access, and also increasing the commuter experience. So just to highlight Warrington Plaza, since we are talking about some of the sustainability considerations and resiliency, everyone knows, I think here, that Hoboken is largely a flood-prone area. DEP is currently working on the DEP resiliency wall to improve some of the flooding conditions. But on a more site-specific level, we can see the areas here. The gradient of the existing elevations of Warrington Plaza. So you can see there's almost a natural detention basin or bowl in the plaza itself, where the elevation is only about 3 feet above sea level. And then the remainder of the property is about 6. So really what we're looking for as part of this debt defeasance money and restoration of this plaza is to bring that plaza level up to it won't be a flood-proof area, but it'll mitigate that nuisance flooding on the day-to-day from storm events or things like that. It will not protect against a 100-year flood. I want to disclose that up front, just with the realities of a historic structure and the limitations with heights. So we can see, looking at the proposed plans here, there is a lower plaza and upper plaza. That upper plaza will bring up the first floor of the ferry terminal building, consistent with that plaza level. That gets you out of that nuisance flood. And then within that lower plaza level, that will be raised to be consistent with the rest of the rail yard. And then just important to note here, there is a fair number of infill for reducing the impervious coverage throughout the yard. So you have now new lawn, new areas for retention, as well as a detention basin on the lower area. Again, will it stop another Hurricane Sandy event? No, but it will reduce that day-to-day nuisance flooding. So again, we can see today largely construction trailers, fences, mostly parking. And then the future condition as it is under construction now. This presents an open market concept. So you can see with the spill out from the first floor of the ferry terminal building, as well as the speculative office tower in the rear, that will show basically the future opportunities of access into the station. And then another one of the items I wanted to present, really as somebody from a transportation agency, is the connectivity opportunities and improvements. So we can see the existing conditions of, this is Hudson Place now, looking west. The old bus terminal is to the left, and then most of the pickup drop-off is now situated in a queue line, and you have most of the space dedicated to on-street parking. So this shows a couple iterations of how we are envisioning this to be redeveloped. The bus terminal is now under construction at current, with the interim bus terminal being delivered earlier this summer. Essentially what this is going to do is allow for the buses to make a uninterrupted turn with that bowl at the end of the terminal, and then pull into a relaxed sawtooth for pickup drop-off of customers. So they are currently doing a K-turn and basically queuing. So it creates a much better traffic flow for operational needs. And then the remainder of the Hudson Place will be for pedestrian use, with limited access for emergency vehicle to the Warrington Plaza and Ferry Terminal building. And then on top of that, we are also working on, and it looks like that got cut off on the image, the bicycle improvements and connections, working with the city of Hoboken. So again, after construction, that's what this approach to the ferry terminal building will look like. And that has the office and new bus terminal to the right. All right, that's everything for me.
Hi. Thank you. I'm from Hoboken, so seeing that, I city bike to the terminal a lot, so seeing where it was and where it's going, that's really exciting. So
The construction will be worth it.
yeah, no, I think it's worth it. So, again, my name is Michael Hong, and I'm with RPM Development, and I had the opportunity of leading our passive house redevelopment of about 44 units in Madison, New Jersey. And I call this the 15-minute borough because it's not technically a city, but I love the fact that these downtowns exist in a lot of our suburban centers, and outside of the Jersey City, Newark, Hobokens of the world, there's a lot of opportunity to provide many of the urban amenities in a suburban environment, especially around our transit. And so you can see in here where that pinpoint is 28 Walnut, that's where the development is, and it's about a 10-minute walk down to the Madison train station. And I've very much done the walk myself to grab a bite to eat downtown, and it is a very easy walk, less than 10 minutes to certain retail. And you have the community arts center right there. You have the public schools right next door. So there's playgrounds and there's a baseball field. So everything truly, if someone wanted to really remove reliance on a car and live in the suburbs, this is a great example of where those needs can be met. And so this is a passive house net zero energy ready project. And so I know it's a term that many of you might be aware of, but many of the public, I kind of have to explain it a little bit more. But it's essentially an ultra tight design. It is certified by FIAS, and there's insulation even down to the foundation. I remember when I saw, I was in a meeting, someone brought a roll of what looked like duct tape, and the construction manager told me, no, that's very expensive insulation tape that they have to put down underneath. And so they really take airtight insulation as a big part of the passive house system. It saves up to 90% of HVAC costs, and each of these buildings will have solar on it. It hasn't been turned on yet. But when it's turned on, each unit will have panels assigned to them, and so they'll directly benefit from solar energy on their energy bills. And I'll show you the picture of an ERV, but because it's so tight, you need an air exchanger to bring in fresh air and take out stale air. And what's interesting is about this energy exchanger is that when it brings in fresh air, it uses the outgoing air's temperature to condition the air when it comes in. So when you bring in fresh air during the winter, it's going to be warm when it comes into the unit, so that you're not using more heating costs to make up for it. We did decide to go all electric. You can do, we talked about doing natural gas venting for cooktops and the dryers, but we ultimately decided, because when you have to do that, you have to punch holes in the structure itself, and that just creates more opportunities for leakage. And we also believed in the idea that the grid is becoming more green, and by going all electric, that is where the future of where we see, the intersection of housing development and addressing climate change is really coming together. We also talked about, because we usually have backup generators to run the water pumps in case there's a power outage. And we were able to install a power wall instead, because, it's also the spacing. You have to make space for a generator. You have to make sure it's, filled up with oil. You have to run it every so often on maintenance. And we decided having a big battery, I think it's like an 11 kilowatt battery, there would be a better solution. That's actually connected directly to a solar panel, so it'll be powered by solar. And they said that it should run the water pumps for about 72 hours without connection to the grid. And so in Madison, the borough's a utility provider, and they say they've never had a power outage last that long. So, it was very cool to kind of see this come to life, because I haven't had the opportunity to work on something that's very heavy on passive house and be able to utilize some of these new technologies like backup batteries. So it was a really cool experience to do that. And as part of that, there's also an EV charger and whatnot. Like I said, there's solar panels, there's an EV charger, there's no on-site fossil fuel usage. And so part of the big benefit here is that this community can benefit from state policy of becoming more green. So as we phase out fossil fuels, the sustainability of the building itself even goes up. And something I want to mention as part of the net zero energy ready part is that the idea is with the solar panels that you really minimize. The goal is to have a net zero pull from the grid, and we call it net zero ready because ultimately we won't know if it's going to be truly net zero until we actually operate the building. Based on calculations, we try to do the best with the space that we have and the roof space that we have. It'll probably be unlikely to be net zero, but we'll get pretty close to it. So I'm excited to see the results of that. But this is a little bit of how it looks now. We got COs this summer. It's leasing up. It is townhouse style development, stacked townhomes, because that is the aesthetic of Madison, New Jersey. So we really wanted to kind of have that continuity. And this is what it looks like in the unit, all electric stovetop, and you could see the mini splits. And it's I believe that if I'm building affordable housing, I like to build it where I want to live there myself. And this is a unit that is better than my unit in Hoboken. So so I'm really excited to see families move in. I did this because I didn't have a better picture of the solar panel. But this gives you an idea of what it looks like, what it would look. I've had a drone set up, but you could see there's 4 buildings right here. You could see the solar panels on the roofs. And then there's 3 smaller buildings on the other side. Now this used to be an old 2-story civic center with a lot of parking around it. So the borough put out an RFP to redevelop it into affordable housing. The 4 buildings to the corner, that was a field that belonged to the public school. So they ended up subdividing that as part of this redevelopment. And so this is what an ERV looks like. This one's not fully connected, but this basically brings in the fresh air from the outside, conditions it, and pulls it into the unit. And here we have ventless dryers, and I think there was some concern when we were first, at the planning board or in meeting with community members about ventless dryers, and we really had to explain, and really there's a little bit of an education process that ventless dryers have come a long way, and they're a lot better than where they were in the past, and this is sort of, it just didn't make sense to put gas into a building like this. And so part of this is the affordability. To touch on it, we had 8 project-based vouchers through the Madison Housing Authority, and that's going to support formerly homeless households or people at risk of homelessness. The rest of the 44 units are affordable up to 60% AMI, and I know that's sort of like what does that exactly mean? And so, for an example, a family of 4 in a 3-bedroom apartment, their maximum income would be about $80,000 a year, and their monthly rent would be about $2,100 a month. In a 50% AMI 3-bedroom unit, it'd be about $70,000 a year with the maximum rent of about $18,000. And this is what I really believe is sort of the future of where affordable housing should be. This school district is, the high school is in the top 18% in New Jersey, top 10% nationally. And so coming to Madison, it was a bit of a full circle moment for me because, I grew up in New Jersey, and coming from I'm a first generation Korean American, and a lot of, education is a very common topic in the community. And I remember Madison coming up as, if you can find a way to secure housing there and send your kids to the school district, their futures are set. And so I knew a family who, blue collar, small business owner, he was able to find housing in Madison many years ago. And the good story is that his son ended up going to medical school and becoming a doctor. And so, this is to have the a family who owns a business, a cleaning business, to have a son that becomes a doctor is quite the story. And that's sort of the opportunity that I really see with this development, is seeing people move in and have that access to not just quality housing, but community resources. That's the fight against income inequality, that this is part of it. This is a big part of it. And, the intersection of the housing crisis and climate change, they very much go hand in hand together. And, this was only made possible because the free market can't support this yet, because it's just the cost of this technology is really expensive. And so we had support from the New Jersey Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency through the Affordable Housing Production Fund. Morris County put in money along with trust funds from the borough. And Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill also advocated in Congress to secure some subsidies directly for this project. And that's what made this possible. And part of also what made this possible is that when the borough wanted to do this, in 2016, they hadn't had those direct conversations with all the neighbors yet about what affordable housing in their community was. And there was a lot of misconceptions, and election year, so the project was effectively put on pause. But since then, they brought us back in 2021. They did another RFP, but what the difference was that I noticed as well is that the mayor went door to door to each neighbor and talks to them about, this is what the affordable housing development is. These are the families that are going to be supported by this, because people don't realize. I've had people be like, well, do they pay rent? I was like, of course they pay rent. They have to get. There's a leasing contract, they pay 30% of their income. That many people get surprised by that fact. Like, oh, they do pay rent. It's like, yes. And these are people that you see at the grocery store, entry-level teachers, entry-level police officers. These are people in your community. This isn't some unknown person coming into your community. They're very much people that are already living in your community and probably living with family. And so as part of this policy discussion that we also had to have with the state was, this is putting that climate change policy into action. It is expensive, but I have to, it's funny, my time in NASA, something I learned about is all these technologies at the time were highly expensive, but it was very mission driven. And today we have things like ballpoint pens, GPS, even certain types of asphalt, thermal wear. A lot of that came out of NASA at a time where there was no use for it except for space. And so for me, by doing this, our contractors are starting to understand how passive house development happens. They're starting to develop the supply chains for the materials to build passive house. And so the idea is that as the state continues to take on this role, that the subsidy will start to wear down because the cost will start to come down, that there's a little bit more scale. And so that was a tough conversation to have. But ultimately, they supported us and they love this project. And I truly believe that if we're going to tackle both the housing crisis and climate change, that these are the ideas and this is the alignment that we need. So, and that's it for me.
Hello. So just really quick reintroduction. My name's Lisa. I am the city stormwater lead at the Nature Conservancy in New Jersey. And something that I want to bring to this discussion is, and everybody brought up such great points, and I love Madison. I've worked really closely with them. I actually went to college in Madison. Is when we're thinking about any redevelopment or infill, how can we make streets look like this, where they're not just a place for people or a place for cars or bikes, but it also is a place that helps bring environmental areas into places where people can access it, where it's walkable, but also places where people feel comfortable being outside and they're not just like in a new development with a brand new building, but then it's hot because all that's surrounding them is like infrastructure. So this is my background again. But the one thing I wanted to bring up when going over this is like the
fact about engaging local communities and how important it is when we're going through these topics. And I love that you brought up that Mayor Connolly went door to door to talk to every single resident, is that you really need to talk to everybody in the community. And when you have their input on what they want to see in their own community, you get these really great ideas of how to build something in the community that, one, the community can back, but two, that the community will take ownership of and want to see more of in their local environment. So a little bit about the Nature Conservancy. We're a global environmental nonprofit that was founded in 1951. We have over 1,000 scientists on staff and are in over 80 countries and territories worldwide. And TNC in New Jersey was established 4 years later in 1955. And we have a bunch of priorities that we're working to hit, a lot of them being the traditional conservation style of protecting lands, restoring rivers, improving our coastal lines. But I work on our cities team, which is focused mostly on how can we bring nature into the cities, but how can we make a real impact on the people who live in the cities that are affected by climate change or different environmental factors. So one of our really big goals is planting 30,000 trees in Newark and Paterson, and these trees will predominantly be street trees. So thinking about when we're doing redevelopment, how can we work with developers, the city, to make sure that trees are a part of their plan? How can we make sure that when we have a development going in, that stormwater is something people think about when we're in cities like Paterson that experience flooding constantly, even not next to the Passaic River, but inside because of their aging infrastructure. So one thing that I'm really working on, specifically in Paterson, is green streets, and background in pedestrian and working with the Bloustein School is making it not just complete streets, but complete and green streets. So a place where people can walk. Unfortunately, the project I have now doesn't have bike lanes, but thinking about how we can then in certain areas add bike lanes. And then there's also these areas of greenery and green infrastructure to have streets like this where people want to be, and people don't have to feel like they have to like close the road down because it's flooding. People can't park their car. People lose their car, especially in areas that are flood prone. They're having to deal with this on a weekly basis, sometimes monthly basis. So this is one of the examples of the project that we're working on now in Paterson. It is on Fair Street. It is located right next to a park, a church, a public school, a food and clothing distribution center, and a couple of apartment buildings. So this project will include 6 stormwater planters, 2 at each of the corners, one being by the school where we were intentional about having a very high visibility crosswalk, having those bollards to really slow down cars, make sure that they're turning away from the planters and anybody walking in the street. And also having a place where the stormwater can go, so it's not actually going onto the street. The buses can park there, people can access their homes, people can access the food and clothing distribution center. And the thing that we did during this project, it did not look like this originally. It had different planters, it had them kind of diagonal across the street. Is we held a bunch of community meetings where we just stood there and we're like, what do you want to see in your community? So we had advocates come out, we had community leaders come out. When nobody from the community actually came out that lived on the street, we sent like 200 mailers to every single person. So we were actively trying to make sure that the community had input and that the community understood what was going on the street, when construction would start, and then what the impact of this project would be. This is funded through a NJTOD 319H Water Quality Restoration Grant, and we partnered with Rutgers actually to do the design. And then another thing that I just want to bring up too is when we're thinking about infill development, when we're thinking about redevelopment, especially in our highly urban and dense population areas, is heat is something that's very important to consider. And I love that you guys are working on like greening buildings. I love the parking deck that was going in Plainfield, and looking at how, so over here it's like 97 degrees, and this is the Newark Green Print. It's a tool that we developed with FEMA money. And over there is a school in the very corner that is 96 degrees, but in the park on the same exact day, it's 81 degrees. So greenery and having these green spaces when we're thinking about development really matters, and how we can pair this with it. It's not hard to think about putting in like a green roof or having street trees laid out or parks intermittently, where even if we can't have it on the street where people are, there's places when they're walking to transit or parks or their house or the grocery store, that they're not walking 10 minutes is not a very long walk, but when it's 100 degrees on the pavement, that's a very, very long walk. And when your neighborhood that you live in is 97 degrees all the time, when the next street over is 81 degrees all the time, that's a huge difference on your walk to wherever you're going. And maybe it's a reason you don't want to walk to the train station, or you maybe don't have a car, so you do have to walk to the train station or the bus stop. But we need to start thinking about how we can bring these natural elements to make it a pleasant walk and a pleasant place to be for them. So that's my spiel.
Wow, awesome job, guys. It was really great. So I'm going to kick things off with a few questions for the panel. And then, from there, we'll kind of get a feel from you all as to how you might augment that with additional questions and the like. So I'm going to start with, on the transit and mobility side of things. So studies show that residents of TOD urban infill developments drive up to 2/3 less than those in comparable suburban projects, thanks to access to transit and walkable downtowns. How can municipalities and developers strengthen the case for infill development while recognizing that many of our suburban towns are still largely auto-dependent and parking still an issue we need to resolve from a design perspective? Anybody want to jump in and take that one on?
I can start with that. It seems prime for a trans question. I think that really the big thing is the understanding that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to this infill development. We kind of look at it by place type, from an urban center to a rural place. So this parking recommendation is not to say, the example I use of Hoboken is an urban center. There's no replacement parking there. There's no parking there at current. But if you're looking at development elsewhere in the state, to assume the same level of walkability and lack of car dependency is different would be naive. So really, it's, I think, being realistic but ambitious on some of that replacement parking from our perspective of where we're looking at where the trends are for car utilization as well as station access. So how people are currently getting to these commuting areas or commuting nodes. So that will be a good indicator for us to make assumptions on the future and trends of what the access will look like in the future as people become more or less car dependent. I think you look at the cost of vehicles today, they're going up. You look at the rate of the younger generation that is now less and less reaching for driver's licenses and preferring for alternate modes of transportation. So there are instances where you could have a one-car household in a suburban area where you can walk to, where one person can walk to transit, or you can have a ride share option within a development. So say your day-to-day commute is walkable within the neighborhood, one person may commute. Then if for the weekend you want to go away, there's an option for a car, but you're not responsible for storing the car, paying for the upkeep and maintenance on a vehicle as that becomes increasingly more expensive. It just gives a different option for people as the attitude towards car ownership and the walkability changes with kind of a generational shift, I think.
Good point. Does that, Mike, does that mean that transit, when they're looking at utilization of surface parking lots that say might be under your ownership, you'll look at them based on context?
Yeah, we look at everything. So really with, some of our utilization is, some of our stations are downtown. So you look at, candidly, you'll see some of the utilization is off commuter hours is actually the peak. So understanding what the use is, what the requirements are, and just getting a sense of kind of what that obligation is. So there's instances where our parking facilities support adjacent retail and shopping areas, so you have to look at that as kind of the holistic replacement and really just New Jersey Transit functioning as a good neighbor within the community.
Good stuff. Anyone else on that? How about
Just
you?
to add from the municipal point of view, I think that we get a balance of not only the parking option, but also the housing options. I think when you're looking at housing around TOD, you're not just talking about mixed-use apartment buildings. What we're seeing is that you have the opportunity for mixed use, you have the opportunity for retail corridors, but we're also developing townhomes that are less than a quarter of a mile from our train stations. We're also developing where you can see something where you have affordability options. Developing over some of our parking lots, we have a 100% senior affordable that connects to our downtown. Then also building on some of the context around it, you have areas where you have our Cleveland Arts District, where it's a corridor where you can have 0.5 parking because you have these live workspaces and you have these maker spaces. So I think when we're looking around development incentives for developers coming to municipalities, there are options. You're not just looking for your typical market rate mixed use residential developer. You're looking for your affordable townhome developer. You might be looking for a single family home. It's just you offer an option of a mixed housing stock and mixed connectivity options. Not everyone in Plainfield has a car, but they have an option too, where we're looking to create a circulator shuttle that you're connecting them to these 2 train stations, as well as some of the nodes that you have going on around the city. And that's an incentive for the developer as well.
Great. Anybody else? Tim?
Yeah, it's important to remember that the goal is to enable people to drive less. And what that looks like is going to depend on what the place looks like already. It's going to be different in different contexts. And it doesn't necessarily mean getting people to give up their cars. It could mean making car trips shorter and enabling some households to get by with 1 vehicle instead of 2. So in a suburban downtown around a train station, maybe if you've mostly got single-family detached housing around the train station, maybe it means doing infill with higher density housing types. It's not going to change the average trip length for the people that already live there, but it will give a whole new bunch of people an opportunity to live somewhere where they don't need the car for everything, and even when they do use the car, they're not driving as long. So I think if you present that as the goal and say, well, there's no one size fits all, it's going to depend on what kind of place it is, but there are ways to adapt to make your development pattern less dependent on the car. No matter how high or low the level of car dependence already is, there are ways to bring it down.
And I'd also add, part of my experience is that I think you don't want force people to give up their cars. You want to make it easier. And something simple that I've noticed is there's no sidewalks in some of these suburban communities. And when you don't have a sidewalk and you push people to walk on the street, that already changes your experience. And even in Madison, I was like, oh, is there a good lunch spot? Like, is it walkable? They were like, oh, no, you don't want to walk there. And looked on the map, I was like, oh, it's not that bad. I walked it, and for me, coming from Hoboken, it was easy. But I could see somebody who doesn't necessarily come from an urban area. You consider it's like, oh, there's no sidewalk, there's no crosswalk. I don't feel safe, so I'm not going to do that. But if you want people to give it up, having even simple things like sidewalks, bump outs, even having that street trees, having the rain gardens on the corners, visibility, that makes it more inviting. And it starts to introduce the idea, maybe I don't need to get in the car today. It's nice out, maybe I go for a walk. And I think those are the ways where you really kind of give people the incentive to rely on their car less.
Well, on that note, unless Lisa, do you have anything to add on that? That's a very important point, because often, I've lived and worked in a lot of walkable towns, and I see the same sort of phenomenon happening. So from your perspective, what approaches are out there to that'll allow municipalities to incentivize, well, first recognize that the importance of those interconnectivities and these public spaces are, and then how do you get that to translate to incentives to developers to help them implement that?
Well, I think I think using Madison as an example, they very much had a community group of professionals, and every community is a little different. But in Madison, they had done a lot of engagement of what people wanted, and when they selected the land for this affordable housing development, the principles that were in their mind is we want it to be walkable. We want it to blend into the community. We want people to be able to access the downtown. We want people to go to those local school system without having to get into a car. And not that that was the central goal, but that was part of the policy point that they were really pushing. And they knew that, passive house was something they really wanted to achieve, and they were willing to put trust funds to make it happen. And so there was this alignment of, we want it to be walkable, we want to be sustainable, and we want our affordable housing to blend in. And even to a point where before, I think our first resident moved in, there were local community members that were like, oh, I have, my son's on the football team. I want to connect with your kids so they can get, integrated. And so it's even the soft touches of being that level of welcoming. And you can have those conversations then at that point of like, well, I want people to walk to the train station. It's like, well, okay, let's try it. Even I would encourage municipalities and developers just to do that walk to see what that experience is. And sometimes it is a matter of just putting in a sidewalk sometimes and thinking about the street grid and reconnecting maybe some of these, dead-ended streets. And also not just think about cars, but also think about bike lanes. And I know bike lanes are not necessarily feasible everywhere, but really, once you really just start thinking about the grid and how you can create space for other modes, that's when really things start to change. And even my friends who, very afraid of biking, and so I understand that. But once I got them, we organized like a bike around Manhattan kind of trip, and take the ferry. And they were not city bikers before, especially one was not a city biker, not a biker. After she did it, she was like, "Oh, I've been biking all over ever since then." And so sometimes it's building that infrastructure, and she felt safe because there was protected bike lanes. Mm-hmm. So when you start creating sidewalks, protected bike lanes, and also when you think about parking, really take inventory of your street parking. And because many times it's probably underutilized, and also thinking about what your public parking policy is. In Hoboken for a while I spent more on a trip to Chipotle than a year of street parking permit. So I spend more on Netflix than someone who buys an on-street parking permit would, and they're oversubscribed. So that's where there's a misalignment there. And having those policy discussions, I think, go together to really create an environment where walking, biking becomes more of an option.
Just to go into, I think it starts with the vision and then implementing a comprehensive plan. So if you have a vision of what you want your community to look like, it's a part of what's identified as a strategy in your looking out on your 25-year horizon of the master plan. And then you have a redevelopment plan where this is the tool that you're using to engage your developers about the vision. So one of the things that we have at one of our train station, we had a developer come to us and they wanted to use one of our parking lots for a development. That parking lot literally is probably less than 1/10 of a mile from the train station. So a part of the community benefit is that developer is paying for the construction of a pedestrian plaza. That pedestrian plaza gives more opportunity for walkability. We have another one where the developer building the parking deck is not only looking at, okay, we need to create a parking deck, but we have the solar panels. We also have a microforest where it's an information kiosk that's along the way. So you're not just looking at the developments in isolation, but you're looking at how you're advancing your master plan in the implementation at all times.
I think that's a really important point that your question, I think, was phrased about the developers. And to the extent that a developer can fill in a missing piece in the pedestrian network, that's great, and they should do that. Or if they can locate their development to take advantage of an existing pedestrian network, that's also great. But the pedestrian network has to be there, and if there are gaps in it, a developer can only do what something on the land that they control. It's really up to the municipality to make sure that the larger network is complete, that there aren't gaps in the sidewalk, that there aren't like too many curb cuts along the main street where people want to walk, but you also have cars crossing. And in some cases, it's not even the town. Sometimes it's the county or the state that has to do that. If your main street in your town is a county road or a state road, there are limits to what the town can do. You got to get the state involved to say, well, we got to revisit our access code and see if it's really appropriate to allow so many driveways on this road if it's meant to be where people are walking.
Yeah, I would echo that sentiment as well as emphasize the redevelopment plan and redevelopment law for New Jersey. New Jersey Transit as a state agency, a lot of our development is done through redevelopment plans that we work with collaboratively with the host municipalities. But I think just from the developer perspective too, it's really a symbiotic relationship because the success of the project is contingent upon the success of the public space in a mixed-use development. If you have a poor walking area with ground floor retail, that will struggle for years to come. It's an adverse impact to New Jersey Transit, it's an adverse impact to the developer, and it's an adverse impact to the town. So there's a huge incentive from all parties to get that public realm right. So whether it's, we will look at it in a number of different ways of, maybe we have a pickup drop-off area that has a barrier-free entry, so it becomes a plaza space during off-peak times, so you can host things like farmers markets or public events or something like that. Really just to drive engagement and activity to the development, and really that helps spur the success of the project itself. So it's really on all parties involved to make that actually work.
And I feel like even like going back to the local communities of sometimes in like urban areas, like people don't have cars or the means, so they're walking and they're doing all these things and trying to figure out where people are going or where people want to go, and then trying to then redesign as instead of just like putting something in and then asking people to come to it, see where people are already going or where there's the points of interest, or having that like more placemaking ability behind it really helps to then people want more of that in their city. So it's easier for you to then do more of that and have this redevelopment mindset not be a negative thing or a thing that's going to drive up taxes or something that they don't want to have come into their community. So yeah.
Mike, you brought up an interesting, you brought up local redevelopment and housing law, and since we are talking about infill, I think largely it is a great tool for towns to be able to accomplish a lot of these things. I know in many of the projects I've worked on, whether it was Harrison, where we had developer, town, port authority, transit, all sort of at the table working through how all the development was going to happen, or down south where we're building a town center on a county road where we have the town, the county, and developer in sort of this mega redevelopment agreement. Have you guys seen that in practice as much? Usually you're seeing them between municipality and developer, but then bringing in that third-party state agency, and if you've seen them, what are some examples and how they were successful?
Yeah, I think with us, it's a little bit different because typically New Jersey Transit plays the owner's interest role, where we are the owner of the underlying property in most of these development scenarios. And I think really the big thing is you look at a lot of them are traditionally either excess property or underutilized surface parking lots, and really just understanding at the end of the day, construction is expensive. So if it's not used, why are we building it? So it really need to get that programming right. And then from the municipality side of things, with us working collaboratively, it is state-owned property, so there are no tax revenues to the town as a surface parking lot. As an improved property under a redevelopment plan, typically there's a pilot structure, which means pilot revenues to the municipality for the improvements on of the development, and that will also help spur a little bit more of an offset or defray that NIMBY sentiment of either whether it's congestion, school costs, school-age children, and again, the pilot funding from the state side, that's at this town or the host municipality's discretion of how they choose to allocate that money. So if that needs to go to a school district, it can be allocated. It's really a discretionary item on the town's part. So generally, these are money makers for towns. They're not additional costs. And then with the redevelopment law, the way it typically works for the state of New Jersey, it's really the but-for cost from the infrastructure standpoint. So but for these improvements, the development is not feasible. The developer is on the line for those improvements. So the cost to the municipality is usually pretty negligible in these events. So it's usually a pretty beneficial incentive to actually deliver these projects. And on top of that, we're obviously into the fourth round of affordable housing obligation. So every municipality now has their fair share housing obligation. So just the idea of putting that affordable housing in the right place, close to transit, in a walkable area, is hugely incentivizing too, I think, from my perspective, and what is a best practice.
I think you have an opportunity to leverage a lot of things from not only the state side, but the local side and the developer. So looking at the affordable housing that was built across from City Hall, they utilized a HMFA pilot. They also looked at a pilot that was coming from the city, so you're getting a lower percentage of what they're paying on the annual surcharge. And considering that they built on property that was owned by the city, that property, we weren't collecting taxes on it. So now we have a revenue stream that's not only coming from, we have 220 units of affordable housing. We also have a percent that, even though it's 6% coming in for revenue from a pilot, then we also get additional revenue for a recreation and cultural center. But you also have an opportunity that in terms of the state side where we're utilizing the different tax credit programs. So not only looking at the historic tax credit, but you're looking at new tax credits from EDA. EDA has a CAFE program. CAFE is Cultural Arts Facility Enhancement Program. So that's looking at the Cultural Arts Center. Then you have a low income housing tax credit program. You have Aspire funding. So there's ways where it's not just looking at either it's a municipal incentive, a state incentive, or a federal incentive. How do you stack all these incentives together to really advance the vision or the need that you have for your community? We have a need for affordable housing. And you're told the state needs over 200,000 affordable housing units. Plainfield needs 1,300 affordable housing units. This is how we get here, by stacking all these opportunities.
I'm just wondering if, that's a good point about the HMFA and the Economic Development Authority having various incentives to help towns make affordable housing projects work. I haven't heard of any getting the DOT involved yet. I think maybe with the adoption of a new state plan for the first time since 2001, and the agencies the Department of Community Affairs and the Office of Planning Advocacy are talking to each other about how to make affordable housing developments consistent with the state plan. Maybe there's an opportunity there at some point to get the DOT involved also, because it's great that you have state agencies helping make the housing work, but there's another agency that has to help make it walkable, make it so that the people that move into these developments can get around without a car. And sometimes DOT is the thing that gets in the way of that.
Okay, I'm not gonna beat up on DOT with you. You heard me say that I used to be with DOT, but I will say that DOT, because we've had some opportunities with our infrastructure. Plainfield recently, we've dealt with the flooding system. So I think infrastructure and making sure that our aging infrastructure is maintained is going to be an important part. I think there are opportunities with DOT where we've taken advantage of the transportation alternative grants. That's from DOT, that connectivity there. We've also had the opportunity of looking at safe routes to school going. We have several intersection improvement grants there. We have a local freight impact fund. So there's ways to look at the infrastructure. You get your local municipal aid. It's a part of us improving what you were talking about with those state roadways that we have in there, those county roadways. I think it really comes in with the infrastructure part of it that we're looking at, that state agency.
I should also plug probably the Transit Village grant at this point in the designation, so that's a joint between NJTOD and NJ Transit. So definitely a shameless plug there.
Shameless. Appreciate it.
So, you know, a lot of towns I'm working in, I see support for a lot of these initiatives coming from places that I wouldn't 15 years ago have thought they would come from, particularly from environmental groups. I see Sustainable Jersey had a huge impact on getting towns to kind of do this chase for certification that now has had a groundswell of folks kind of pushing different initiatives and pushing their local leadership towards helping them achieve these points. What's been your perspective from environmental commissions, green teams coming to the table and supporting these development initiatives where, frankly, they belong in TOD areas?
Yeah, and it's like one of those things where when you think of the Nature Conservancy, like historically everybody's like, oh yeah, you protect land, and now I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm doing a green street in like the most, like the third densest like urban area in New Jersey, and everybody's like, the Nature Conservancy's here, and you guys are just reconstructing a road and thinking about like kids. And I think it's thinking about how not like, especially in New Jersey, like we're a very dense state. Like we don't have those opportunities to just be like, yeah, like people live here, nature is here, kids walk to school here. Everything is like tied together. So bringing those conjunction points of like talking to DOT, talking to the city, talking to nonprofits that do pedestrian and bike safety, as well as your like environmental group, and then also like the local church, and having them all to come together and be like, we have a project that's going to make everybody's lives better, and how can we create this project to do that? And that's where we had Sustainable Jersey talking to the city of Paterson, and they were doing a complete streets project. And then the project I took over was just a flood group, like a group of residents that were like very advocating in their like city, being like, it floods here, it's not fair, like we need to do something to fix this. And then that's where we then took over. And you have the city trying to get the silver certification at Sustainable Jersey, so it's easy then for us to come in and be like, we can help you do that. Do you want to plant trees? And then that's where you have like DEP coming together with DOT, and the complete and green streets policy that was passed a couple of years ago made that line easier for you to say like, people deserve to be on the roads, cars can be on the roads, bikes can be on the roads, but then like, what about your stormwater, and what about your shade trees? So there is this like great push now for all of these funding sources, where as an environmental group, I don't just have to go to EPA or DOT, or DEP. I can go to DOT, I can go to New Jersey Transit, and I can say, I would like to do a green bus stop. I would like to do a really great access point to transit for people who live maybe 15 minutes away and don't have a park anywhere near them. But we can put like street trees in that area and make people want to walk to the downtown. We can bring revenue into a downtown because now people want to walk there. So it's been like a really exciting time to like be here, where everybody's kind of coming together to have like a shared mission, especially in New Jersey.
Yeah, I think expanding on that from the New Jersey Transit perspective, having been in other TOD conversations and how they address it throughout the country, you see a lot of greenfield development from someone like Sound Transit out in Seattle, where it's basically a build it and then connect it to the infrastructure and then they will come. Where New Jersey Transit is already New Jersey is already a highly densely developed state. And on top of that, we have an older rail infrastructure system that was historic, with a lot of historic fields. So the things that kind of keep me up as like the boogeyman at night with our redevelopment is the site remediation cost. Because if you look at the cost of remediation for some of these sites, you're upside down on a pro forma very quickly. Mm-hmm. So I think really the thing is getting very clever or creative on some of these capital stacks. Like Zenobia was highlighting some of these other grant programs, and then also working with having more partners come to the table to make that capital stack work as these projects have to develop. So it's really requires a little bit of creative problem solving for some of these sites, and then understanding the environmental impact on all these sites vary from site to site. So a lot requires more remediation than others. So it's really making that impact in those dollars, because there's a finite number of dollars available. So how do you spread that to make the biggest impact towards achieving the overall TOD and housing policies?
Mike, Tim, anything to add on that?
Sure. Well, not to add to that directly, but
Or
to
to the
respond to
question.
your initial question.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I first started in this field 25 years ago, that's when smart growth was like the buzzword, and a lot of organizations were saying they were on board with smart growth, but with a lot of the environmental groups, if you really unpacked their rhetoric, it sounded more like no growth.
Yeah.
Like we shouldn't develop out there. Oh, well, how about encouraging development in places that are already built out, and suddenly they lose interest. But I think that's changed. They kind of got an assist from the market, frankly, with the millennial generation deciding they don't want to live out on the urban fringe. They want to live in compact, walkable urbanism. I know that was a big thing in the popular press for a while, but I actually crunched the numbers around 2017 or so. I wrote a report about it, and it turns out, no, the hype is true. Like at any place in New Jersey that ticks off the metrics of compactness, mixed use, good grid street network, they all had disproportionate concentrations of 25 to 34-year-olds. So it was not just the media hype, it was a real thing. So that, and like I showed you with the slides, that took a lot of development pressure off of the suburban fringe so that it's not the same sense of urgency as it was in the early 2000s. And a good indicator of this, I hate to pick on one organization in particular, but the New Jersey Conservation Foundation last year released a report trying to lay out an agenda for the environmental groups. And the first half of it read like what you would have expected in 2001. Oh, the land is disappearing, we got to buy it up before it's gone. But in 2001, that would have been the entirety of the report. But instead, this report, the whole second half of it was about greening urban areas. Like, right on, NJCF, this is, you're on board now. This is so I think that's a real change from when I first started.
A pleasant change.
Mhm.
I think there's also looking at, when you look at EDA, they're not just looking at something for developers, but how to balance sustainability. So they're looking for municipalities to opt into clean energy and what you're doing in terms of filling the gaps with tax credit there. So they have a PACE buy into, and that's looking at property and I believe it's property assessed commercial enhancement, where you're looking for clean energy projects and specific tax credits are available if you're actually implementing clean energy building or green building practices. So there's different options where the incentive is we will support this type of developer. So if you're looking for a way to fill that financial gap, then a part of the incentive to do sustainable development is that you have this tax credit now available to you.
Good.
And something that, on the topic of EDA, my project in Union City, it's 101 units, 100% affordable, senior with some developmentally disabled units. It was on a parking lot in Union City, and Union City is denser than Manhattan. There's a lot of housing packed in, but in the middle of Union City is this big municipal parking lot, and the mayor had a vision of, I want this to be affordable housing, but I want the parking preserved. And it was a bit of a puzzle piece, because it's not like we can charge $300-400 a spot for parking to finance it. And what really made it happen was when EDA came out with the Aspire tax credit program, and we could marry it with the 4% low-income housing tax credits with some additional, production funds from HMFA. We were able to marry those programs together, and we were one of the first residential buildings to get Aspire tax credits. And what I'll tell you is that even for Citibank, who's a lot of smart people over there, it was also a learning process for them, because marrying two agency programs together who weren't necessarily built to be together, they came together. Of course, it worked, but it was a learning process. But now that that synergy has been built, it's becoming more of a viable financing strategy across our portfolio in general. It's becoming more of a thing. But in that project in particular, because of that, we were able to replace the parking, do a little bit of, not a lot of seniors drive, but in that area, there's multiple bus stops, walkable to all the amenities you can imagine in terms of retail and park space. And so, and we were able to preserve some, there was a USPS on site, and let me tell you, getting them to relocate for just temporarily was moving a mountain. And but they agreed to come back, and now we have a mixed-use building with public parking and a little bit of residential parking with the post office on the ground floor, maybe a future business for the other retail spot. And so this is sort of that institutional knowledge of like different financing programs out there. And I've had conversations with other, other people who want to potentially develop, but they don't know that these financing programs are out there. And so I think there is this gap of education of like, there are a lot of financing programs out there, but you need to talk to people who kind of went through the brain damage, and talking to people like us, at the different levels, we've gone through the brain damage. Talk to us. We can help. We know how to, navigate this. And so I think the private market is starting to catch on to it, especially in areas where there is a remediation issue, or we've gotten free land before where there's about $1 million of rock excavation to do. So talk to we've at this panel, and not just on this panel, but we're a group of professionals that have gone through it, and we could really do a lot.
Well, thank you all for these thoughtful perspectives and sharing your experiences. I think what we've heard here really underscores that TOD is more than just building near stations and transportation assets. It's about building community and most importantly, collaboration. I'm getting a lot out of this. We've also been reminded we've come a long way in the past few decades. There's still some real challenges ahead, balancing growth, of course, with affordability, ensuring TOD supports climate goals, and adapting to shifts on how people live and work. So with that said, I'd like to open up things and hear from the audience. This is your chance to ask questions, share your experiences, or even challenge some of which you've heard today. Anybody want to jump in? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I wanted to, this is directed to Zenobia. I'm from Princeton, I'm Princeton Council, and one of the challenges we have is but for, using redevelopment is so important, but we get so much pushback, so much misperception. I'm just wondering, because we have some public assets that we're looking at, finding ways to do mixed use with them. Redevelopment would be the way to go. When you did your projects, did you do area need of redevelopment on a case-by-case or project-by-project basis? Did you do a larger swath of area? I'm very impressed with what you're doing in Plainfield. I'm just curious, how did you approach that from the basics?
The examples that you've seen, those were area in need of redevelopment studies. They started out as studies, then we did the redevelopment plan for a larger area. Particularly around our TOD, we have 4 TOD redevelopment plans that are happening. So one is looking at Netherwood Station, another one is looking at, there's 3 that are connected to the Plainfield Station. In terms of looking at case-by-case basis, and I want to point out, redevelopment can never be spot zoning, so make sure you tell people that. We do have opportunities where I may have a developer come to me and say, hey, I'm interested in doing affordable housing. And I see that there's this vacant parcel of land, or there's this parking lot that we want to develop. So we look at the opportunity to do redevelopment studies, and there might be a smaller area in need developed.
But you did some larger.
We do larger, we have 25 of those larger plans.
Princeton's always an interesting place to plan.
It's very challenging, and there's a lot happening right now.
I lived right down the road, so I've seen it over 30 years now. Anyone else? Yes?
Yeah, I'm curious to know, interesting that the formula of trying to stack all these different partnerships and funding sources and partnerships across agencies that are inclined to or incentivized to or structured in that way. Who's kind of driving that? I'm curious, is it really the responsibility of the municipality to kind of drive that? I hear you're talking about from the developer side. Is it kind of pushing from different points? And then a separate, related question was the question of, what do community residents say? I know I heard a little bit about the professional group there, but those who don't have cars, and you said the goal was not to have reduced driving. I'm curious to know I know most of these projects come out of developers proposing a vision. Just wonder how much is it kind of driven by the community residents? Because ultimately, you said the success of a project is the people who actually utilize and activate the space. So going back to that point, where are they in the picture? So there's two questions.
Yeah, two different questions. First one.
Yeah, I'll say from the developer standpoint, we needed to make this project work, and we needed to have those hard conversations with the agency. And part of, we had to explore different types. We thought about twinning, where you marry 9% and 4% together, but it's a different type of brain damage, and the agency didn't want that. And so by having these conversations with them, you might not have a solution up front, but it highlights, oh, this is a problem that we are seeing. And when Aspire came out, we had to really work with them to get both agencies, because they also have different board dates, and it's a little bit of who goes first. And so having those conversations of marrying the two, there's definitely friction, at first. But once there is a little bit more, especially a new program, there's a little bit of trust building that needs to happen, even though they're sister agencies. Because it's a little bit of the unknown. I don't know how this program will work in practice, so I want to see a little bit more. And in the beginning, I think there's a lot of upfront conversations about, okay, like these are how the numbers work, and it only works with both of these agencies working together. It's not going to happen as fast. It's always going to be a little bit slower than you want it to be. But in the beginning, there's a lot of that. But once you kind of bring that pathway together, it gets a little bit easier. And I think from the developer standpoint, we have to do it because we have no other solution if we want to make this vision come true. But we also have, Union City Mayor Stack and State Senator Stack, he's also very much engaged. And so he also used his advocacy to reach out to the agencies and help the project along and push through some of these things. And he did everything in his power to, because it was a Union City Parking Authority lot, and we had to go through the permitting process, which is a little bit challenging with different personalities. And so he had the wherewithal to push through all that. He's like, let me know if I have to make a phone call. And it's not just like, hey, just let this through. It's a little bit of like, we do need your attention on this issue. And in the beginning it's hard, but they do come together. That's what I do find.
I was gonna say for the partnership side, no, it's like finding people who have a shared goal, but that there's one overlap in the Venn diagram where the Nature Conservancy maybe isn't about redevelopment, or that's not our mission. Our mission is, how do we solve flooding or extreme heat or areas without trees or without parks? How can we bring that into those areas to really benefit people? But then there's a developer who wants to put in a building. We could be but what about some trees? And for the city, it's okay, well, you're dealing with all of these issues. For flooding, you have to meet your long-term control plan. You can do that through green infrastructure. We can help you. We can help provide funding or find the funding. There's community groups that are oh, well, we're only concerned about the quality of the Passaic River, but they can maybe come on board for something else. So you can kind of bring this coalition of people who don't have a shared overarching mission, but have a shared goal for certain things together, and that really helps that any project that you're trying to do grow a little bit faster, because then you have the network of, well, that person's tied in with these community members and these residents, but we're not. And this group, like Passaic Habitat for Humanity, is like building houses, but like we want to put a park in and they want to put a park in. So can we come together to get like trees in a park where an area where there's nothing? So kind of looking at those, maybe not obvious partnerships, but that can help move your project further along or try to get that community buy-in that you maybe didn't have access to before.
Yeah, I definitely would echo that sentiment that you're always looking for that mutual benefit that you might not see immediately, but it may play out in a future project. So I will say one thing about the Cultural Recreation Center where we were looking for an operator, and it depended to be the operator from Chelsea Piers. That operator had a connection to another person that knew Pickle Ridge, so it developed down the street. So there's always something where you're having a conversation where a developer, even though people love to say, oh, the developer is about making money, and people get into development for different reasons. They have different interests, but there's some kind of connection that you can keep leveraging. And when you're looking in terms of like your capital stack, just always having your eyes open, well, how can I use this and where? And having developers that may have experience in affordable housing and using Expire and tax credits there. And you'll be able to apply that knowledge on the next project.
That's an important point on developers and profitability. A lot of towns get hung up on how much money a developer's making and almost faulting them for wanting to make money on a project. And a lot of these projects have big risk. And so recognizing that, I think you have to come to the table, particularly from a town's perspective, and knowing that they're investing in the town. How do I best support that with the amenities that then I need to get, that might chip away a little bit at that profit, but not so much so where you start to chase the developer away or become adversarial. So I think recognizing that all the bells and whistles you're asking for costs quite a bit of money sometimes, but ultimately they're going to be beneficial for the town and beneficial for the developer, and you come to either the state or the county with an ask, and you're sort of unified in that ask. Joe?
Yeah, I wanted to bring the conversation back again to coordination, especially state agencies, localities, and I want to point to the state plan. I was very happy to see Tim's graphic of the transformation and where the COs were being issued. I don't think it's an accident that the state plan, that is still the operative plan, soon to be replaced, I hope, listed as its #1 goal, the revitalizations of New Jersey's cities and towns. And what that did was to send messages through state agencies, many of them were heard, to amend their functional plans to focus on those goals. And so that's why I think over this period of time, in addition to the market move by millennials, I don't dismiss that, but the combination of the state going along the same path with amending rules and focusing. EDA has priorities for areas in planning area 1 and so on, and this is important, not because of looking only at the past, but because now we have a new state plan about to come into being, I hope, and that should be implemented and supported in order to keep this momentum of these wonderful projects going forward. So not a question, but a comment, and thank you, Tim, for those numbers.
Well, I'm going to respond to it, even though it's not a question. No, I think you make a really good point, Joe, that I wish funders understood better, that it's hard to point to what effect you're having. I do think that the fact that we had that state plan in the background, even though it's not mandatory, it's not a legislative document, it put those ideas out there, and in fact, some state agencies started incorporating some of the concepts from the state plan into their programs. Like, you get extra points if you're applying for certain programs from EDA, if you're in a center or planning area 1 and 2. So these ideas seep out there eventually. It's hard for anyone 20 years later to point to the result and say, oh yeah, we did that. but
Yeah.
but I think there is something to the. One thing I'm really looking forward to, our friend John Hassey, who runs the geospatial program at Rowan University, who was in the planning program here when I was here, so I've known him for a while. And he's done a lot of work on the update to the state plan. Something he wants to do, and I'm really excited to see the results, is look at what the state looked like in 2001, what it looks like now, and to what extent did that 25 years worth of development actually follow what the state plan laid out back then. I think such a study would find that it did a pretty good job, that we did a pretty good job of steering development to the places where the state plan said it should go.
Yeah, and I to chime in on that, and thank you, Joe, for steering us in that direction, because right around that time was when, we started devoting a lot of money towards planning grants that were looking at marrying the departments with the towns, with the counties, and with not only just looking at the local, but how it connected to the regional. And we saw that $9 million during the Smart Future Grant Program. And I always wanted OLS to do an analysis of this. That $9 million that went out to all these towns, this was before Asbury and before South Orange and Morristown and a lot of towns that have led to billions and billions of dollars of economic growth over that time. So yeah, market shifts, and I want to just talk about the market shift for a second, because we give a lot of credit to millennials and now Gen Zs, but there are our children.
Well, I had a slide to that effect in a presentation I did a while ago where, as with many things, the millennials get credit for something that it was actually Gen X that started. And I quantified it.
I love when you.
So I sort of have a comment question. So the one thing I want to say is that I was talking earlier to someone when we were all networking. I often get asked, like, why does everything take so long? And I just want to acknowledge that a lot of these ideas started 20, 25 years ago and so forth, and like the images that are behind you are, if people don't know, that's Metuchen, and that's a surface parking lot that is adjacent to the rail line, which is now, was built upon and is a well-occupied and well-utilized building, and it was the first of many that have happened. Well, it's not the first redevelopment that happened in Metuchen, but it was the first on a surface parking lot. And then there were additional ones that were our surface parking lots. So my question is, how do you get municipalities to look at their assets like surface parking and so forth and go, yes, I want to do something with that. Mm-hmm. Have you, I mean, maybe you're not exactly the right audience, the right panel to answer that question, but I think, like, we still have communities that aren't recognizing their assets, mm-hmm. and aren't able to move forward.
Yeah, I think from the transit perspective, the best resources are sitting right next to you. It's our transit-friendly planning folks. So really getting into not to throw them under the bus, but I will. But really, I think what a lot of it has to do with is making sure that, we've worked with, for example, Red Bank just went through their master plan reexamination for the first time, I think, in 20 years. So part of their recommendation was pursue transit village designation. And as part of that, they said, we have a transit overlay district we want to do something around the train station because we understand that the commuter lots are underutilized. They didn't know exactly what it was. So they've worked through over the last year of navigating the blight study, the area need a redevelopment designation, and then a redevelopment plan adoption this summer, which now queues up us to come in and actually implement the project with our development partner. But I think really where a lot of that came from was the conversations on the planning side of the reexamination of the master plan, and also they worked closely with NJTPA on a lot of access studies and what makes sense and where to put density, knowing that it's similar to what we were talking about earlier, where a lot of these towns are largely developed. Red Bank is about 1.8 square miles. It's largely developed town. So understanding that they have a obligation to continue to grow, to meet the affordable housing needs, how do they do that with limited opportunities of open sites? And it's better utilizing these opportunities. And I think to give municipalities a lot of credit, I think a lot of people on that level acknowledge that issue and they hear it from their constituents. So it's a lot of grassroots efforts, and then also being able to bring in partners for the implementation and strategy, which obviously takes time. So as we kind of get further along with our redevelopment work through transit and becoming a larger stakeholder for different municipalities, I think we can help streamline that process from trial and error to some extent, of understanding what needs to be done in order for us to come in and really help implement on projects. And then also, candidly, as a representative from a state agency, I don't find it appropriate to come into one of those meetings and tell a municipality what they should be doing. It should be an open dialogue of them communicating and the community communicating what it is and what kind of community benefits they envision for this space. And then that's how it's like, okay, we hear you, let's see how we can collaborate that and package that into something for redevelopment that works for us and the community.
Well, I'm so glad you said that, Mike. Would love to talk to you about Netherwood Station, because it's underutilized. I love it too. I would like the station as a possibility of real estate. But I think looking at our lots, and something that Mike said is that we've developed a lot of our municipal lots out of necessity because we don't have a lot of vacant land. So when developers come to us and they say, we're looking to develop, but we don't want to go to a private property owner for that development, well, we'll say, well, let's look at our lots. And one of the things that we were asked about the community feedback, even though we have 2 train stations, a lot of my conversations with the community is about the parking and the parking challenges. And Jim Zulo was here earlier. He was one of our parking study consultants, where we always tell them parking is a good problem to have. It means that we have activity. So now the conversations that I have with developers, you can develop on this lot, but I need to keep all of my parking spaces. And then what can we do for the incentive to get you to do affordable housing, to do sustainability? That for us, there's no issue. We see the assets that we have and how to build on them, and how to work with some of our partners as we want to work with Netherwood Station and getting that station more developed.
You can teach a few other places how to do what you do.
And I think just expanding what Zenobia was saying, also really understanding as you go from a surface parking lot to a redevelopment, most of it is structured parking. There is a large cost associated with that. So it's really having to nail that, and that goes back to kind of, I think, the first question of the panel is, how do you deal with parking? There is not a one-size-fits-all, so it's being able to think pragmatically of what the actual need is and managing that, and then also thinking of potential shared parking implementation strategies of, okay, we're sharing, it's in infill and downtown, we understand X number of parking is used after hours, so can commuter parking spaces also serve a double purpose for people that are going out to dinner that may be driving into the downtown and park after 5 o'clock? So the worst thing to have is large parking decks sitting open and underutilized. So really working collaboratively to make sure all of that works together.
Something else that's going to help municipalities recognize the assets they have to work with is the affordable housing requirements, which that's another thing that's changed a lot since I started. You're not seeing nearly as much resistance anymore. That most municipalities have now accepted that this is reality. The Supreme Court decisions are not going away. We're going to have to accommodate some affordable units in our town. How do we do that? So they're looking for help, and there are developers out there that know how to do this. We've got the transit-friendly planning staff at NJ Transit and the Transit Village staff at NJTOD that can help them and say, and the surface parking lots, the infill on surface parking is kind of the low-hanging fruit. I like to think of surface parking as your default or your de facto land bank. You don't have to knock anything down to build something there. You don't have to displace anything. It's already sitting there empty.
Captain Impervious.
Yeah. So I think that's going to create an incentive for municipalities to think about to realize what assets, what developable land they're sitting on, and how to make it. They have to build the stuff anyway. How do we best integrate this into what's already around it and make sure that it's pleasant for everybody?
And that, folks, is a great point to end on. We are at 12 o'clock. I mean, shout it out, NJ Transit staff. And would you like?
1 minute spiel?
Of course you may. Of course.
I want to hold you because I know we're over. Oh, it's 12:01.
No, we're right on.
Okay, just
Yeah.
click down. Look at, would they join the conversation? That was great. Just so for those who don't know me, I'm Megan Massey, Director of Transit Friendly Planning. Love the shout outs, love this panel discussion. It was a really great intersection from the view of a developer, municipality, transit agency, Tim, New Jersey Future, and then the Land Conservancy. I really love the connections that were made. For those of you who don't know, transit-friendly planning, it's been around since the 90s, really pushing to continue educating local officials on the benefits of transit-oriented development and creating a sense of place around transit facilities. Just on our website, we just completed this study for the state of New Jersey, looking at the transit villages, so there are now 37, and taking a look at gentle density and missing middle. So if you have a chance, just go on our website. It's njtransit.com/transit-friendly, and it really talks about a lot of infill development opportunities. Looking at cottage core, triplex, they don't all have to be these huge developments. Within the 10-minute walking distance of a transit facility, you could really get a mix of housing types and create housing choice for your residents. So. With that, I thank you for all attending in person. You will be receiving a survey from us just to get a little bit of feedback on this discussion, what you would like to see more, where you would like to see it, maybe like 5 questions. So please take the time to fill out the survey when you get it. Thanks again.
Yeah.
Have a great day.